Hello everyone, this is Christian Mod Interactive, and by the time that we are done with this video, we will have updated our interface to look a little bit better now. So we'll have a left-hand side that gives us some information. The right-hand side will have our form controls. Just to remind us where we're headed is this was sort of my test case, so I have information on the left-hand side, form controls, plus some information on how to use the control on the right-hand side. This is only formatted this way because I'm zoomed in. Normally would have 3 columns, and on top of that we'll be able to see that we actually have the form up and wired up and working correctly. Alright, so we're going to start by updating our styling here just a little bit here. So we're in the form examples.component.css file, and if you remember, that's the component that contains the router outlet and our main navigation. So speaking of main navigation, we're going to start by modifying it a little bit. First thing, we're going to define an active color. So we want that to be 30, 30, 30. Perfect. So I want the main navigation to be fixed at the top. So we'll say position fixed. So now it's up there. We'll give it the width, 100%, and border bottom, 1 pixel solid. We're going to lighten, use a function, Sass function, so lighten the active color. We're going to lighten that by 25%. Put a background color of white on it and a Z index. We'll move it up just a little bit, 1000. Save that so it's in front of that inputs label. So like I said, the main navigation here, now that contains a UL. So let's modify that just a little bit. So we have a UL. We're going to say display flex direction row. Inside of that UL, of course, are the anchors. So we'll say text decoration none. Save that. Get rid of our underline. Padding 0.5 EM, 1 EM. Display blocks. Padding will work right. Perfect. And actually, let's come up here. Let's give us another one of these. Another link. Save it. So now, actually, if we look here, the router link, so router link active, the router will take care of applying this style when this is the active route. So we'll get that active link class applied to it. So if we come in here and say, and active link, then we can do some stuff here. Scroll down. Background color, and lighten again. Take that active color by 60%. Whoops, do that right. There's our 60%. Make the color, let's make it the active color, and we'll do font weight of 600. Perfect. Now, of course, our input that we have already defined is hidden underneath our navigation, so let's fix that. So we have a router link class on the div that contains a router outlet. Oops. Router outlet, so we want to give it a height, 100%, and a padding. Turns out the padding that we need is 2.5625 EM from the top. 0 right, oops, 0.5 EM bottom, 0 left, save it. Perfect. So now we can see our input. So we're done with that bit. So next thing that we're going to do is to go to our forms group component. Make this full screen here. So the forms group component, we want to have access to some information from our form group. So the first thing that we're going to do is import form control from the Angular Forms namespace. We'll add a few more, or a couple fields here. So private underscore data. Data is an object that has a key indexer or a string indexer, gives us any. And it's going to equal an empty object to begin with. We're going to do the same thing, and this time errors. So we have an object for the data and the errors. Now we want to expose this information to the outside world. So let's make some getters. Public get data. Data is going to return this dot. We're going to call a method here that we haven't defined yet, but it's a method called loop over controls. We'll pass in the object that we want the information added to or overwritten, and we're also going to pass in a function. That function is going to take in a form control, and then it's going to spit out something. In this case, for the data, it's going to spit out the value. So we'll define our function now. So public loop over controls. And like I said, it's going to just take in an object. So the O is an object, and it's going to take in a function, and that function is going to take a form control, and it's going to return to us any. Let's make this object a little more specific. Have our string indexer. All right. So for the moment, we're just going to leave it like that. Let's come up and define a few more getters here. So we're going to do the same thing, except for errors. And we'll change that to errors. Oops, we actually need to change that to errors before we fail. So we're going to get from the form control, we'll get the value for the data, and for errors, we'll get the errors. Next, we'll go ahead and get the group itself, and that's return this dot underscore group. We want to know if the form is valid or not, so we'll do invalid first. So return this dot group dot invalid, and public get valid. Return this dot group dot valid. Perfect. So for the moment, we're getting nothing from our loop over controls. Actually, in the end, what it's going to do is just return this object. So let's just return O. We need to populate it with some values before that's any helpful, but we'll deal with that in a minute. So next thing we're going to turn to is the basic example. So we come into the basic example folder, or examples basic folder here. What we're going to do, let's take a look at the template and the component itself. So if we look in the template, of course we have this form group. So since it's inside of the template, we want access to that. And to do that, we're going to import the viewChild decorator. So we'll come down here and we'll say at viewChild. We'll have to put this selector on our form group here. Form group and private read only form, and I forgot it again. Let's import, and that will be from up to our forms index file, and that gives us the XC form group, which is what our form is. Starts out null. Perfect. So now we're going to want to have access to those items that we added to the form group component, the data, errors, invalid, all that. So let's go ahead and do that while we're here. Private get. Again, I'm going to use the T since it's going to be used in the template. In this case, we're just going to return JSON.stringify, and that's this.form.data. I'm going to format it a little bit, give it two spacing on the formatting. And so we need private get T errors, return JSON.stringify .form.errors, 0 2, perfect. private get t invalid, return this dot form dot invalid, and private get t valid, and this dot form dot valid. Save that. Perfect. So now let's go into the template itself. So what I should have done, if I haven't already, I do. So this is the basic, this is the example one that I created. And way too big. I know it's very hard to read at this point, but that doesn't, we don't need to read it. Point is that what I have is on the left-hand side is a sort of sidebar area which holds information about the controls, like what we just did, the data and the errors, and what's on here is we're modifying it as we go. It's a lot different. And then inside we have, on the right hand side, we have the controls. It's broken up into 3 columns, and we'll talk about those in a second, but let's at least separate things out. And so we'll go back to F screen, increase the size again. All right, so let's first break this up into basically 2 columns. So I'm going to put a div up here, example container. Inside of that, we'll have the div. We'll see the reason why there's a nested div here. Content, and so we want something we're going to call div.form data. That's the left-hand column, and then we'll have another one while we're at it. What did I call it? Div.controls dash template components. Gonna stop with controls, but I think I used controls later on. Got adjusted. So we want this at least inside there. Obviously no physical effect has happened yet. Let's go back into our form data here. So form data then contains something I call a div with the form dorm. So form data heading, that contains an H2 form as a div. So we'll have this this is the top part of our left hand side here, says form, and we need our little lit tags over here, the labels, say whether it's valid or invalid. So we'll make a div, give it a class of validity and valid. We'll do star ngIf equals if t valid. Then we'll show the valid and div.validity invalid. I don't know the form. Syntax highlighting for Pug in Visual Studio is not the best. Invalid. All right, so I'll save that, and thing breaks down, of course, and the reason it does is because I said, hey, we'll put this indicator, we need to say which element of our template is the form group that we're talking about. And of course we do that by applying this thing to it. This thing being, we need a local variable, which is indicated by the hash basic. Since I'm using Pug, I need to have this equals empty string for it to emit this from into the template. Otherwise, they just wouldn't bother inputting. If you're using HTML, you just have to put this hash basic form group. So now we have our valid there, but we're not going to stop there. Outside of the form data heading, we are going to come down here and say, what do we want? An HR. See if we're in the right spot. We are. So then we'll put an h3.form output heading data div.form data output. Do our interpolation on t data. And now we'll need an, did I have another HR? No, I just made that up. That HR doesn't belong there, it belongs down here. So then what we'll do is another h3 form output heading errors div form data output, and this is t errors. Save it. Go ahead and refresh this thing. So now we're getting our empty object from the template here. Now we're going to step back and go back to our basic example component. No, not basic, form group. Back to form group. Let's go ahead and give us full screen here. So we're just returning this O here. So we need to populate O, and really starting to get into understanding or learning rxjs. So we are going to use Rx to do this real quick. So what we need is to import from rxjs. Thing that we need is pairs. Oops. So let's come down here, and what we're going to then do is first thing we'll do is pairs, and we'll do that this group dot controls, and to get us to see something we'll just subscribe, just so we can get an idea of what we're getting here. Save that, look in the browser. So when we subscribe to it, we got these whole bunch of so we get an array of 2 values. That array is the key for the the property, and the first input, or the first element of the array is the key. Second element is the value. So let's use that information. So what we're going to do then is to come up here. We'll define a couple of functions. We'll say key, and that's going to equal a function. That function is going to take in something. That's something that we just saw is an array with 2 values. One's a string, the other one's a form control. And what it's going to do is just spit out the first element. So that gives us the key. Next, we'll say value. Value is the same deal. It's going to take in the array string form control. And it, not surprisingly, is, we would just do this, right? So this would give, so value would be the form control. So this would be giving us the form control. We don't want the form control. We want the f passed in operating on the form control. So let's do f and pass in the form control to it. And now we get it a value which is any. All right. And so now really all that we have to do here is now take this console log statement out here. So we have an object being passed in, which is O. We need to tell it the property name. Well, we have the property name, right? We just use the key function up there on X, and then that makes me looking at it crazy, because I have to. Problem's going to be it. IntelliSense here isn't enough to tell me that the type of this property, but for whatever reason, maybe I can figure it out later, it is not inferring or passing that type along. So let's go ahead and just explicitly say what X is, and X is a string form control. It's an array, and it has this form that we're looking for. Tongue twister. So we have that. Now we just need to set the value, right? So we say value and pass in X. Now we should be good to go. We save it, go back to the browser. We can actually see that the data is being pumped out here as input. Of course, it starts out with a value of null, errors are null. So at least our form group is spitting out the right information, so we can go ahead and close that. I think next thing that we're going to do is to go to the basic example component.scss file and do some styling on this. We're back to the CSS. I'll give us half screen here. All right, so if we look at the pug, we have this example container wrapping everything. So let's start with that. So example container, give it a display of flex and height of 100%. I just want it to occupy the entire space, and we're good to go there. So after the example container, we have the example content. So example content. All right, so inside of example content, it's another thing, but along with learning RX, what I want to get more experience and get more comfortable using is CSS grid. So that's what we're about to use here. So we're going to say display grid, grid template columns, auto one fraction. Like I said, we want that form data on the left hand side. Everything else is on the right hand side. We're going to give the form data a width, and so we want the space taken up for everything else on the right hand side. Grid template areas. Right hand side or left hand side is form data. Right is form controls, and we'll do flex 1 to space it out. So at least we have the entire space being used. All right, so let's do some more stuff here. Let's define a couple of variables or a few variables. Gutter 0.25 em. We'll have form data width, and I want that to be 13 em. Crazy sounding numbers. And form data background color white, and form data border color, we're just going to make it gray. All right, so let's do some form data. Form data, so it's a grid area, and that's form data, and the width is form data width plus 2 times the gutter, and border right. Come on. Why do you don't even want to help me? Border right, 1 pixel solid, and form data border color, background color. You guessed it, form data border color. That's the one. Data background color, padding, gutter. Save that. So we're getting there. We have starting to get a left-hand side going on in here. So let's keep formatting what's going on in here. So if you remember the top, this form and the valid is in a div with a class of form data heading. Border bottom, 1 pixel solid, form data border color, display, not direction, display, flex direction, row, items, center, padding bottom 0.25 em, and oops, make this a little higher, margin bottom 1.5. Save that, at least on its own row there. So that thing, the form is contained within an H2. So we say flex 1, I want the H2 to take up as much space as possible, and we're going to give it margin 0. All right. So that valid tag there, if you remember, is contained within a div that has a validity class on it. Padding 0.25 em, color white, width 3.5 em, and text align center. Let's make it disappear. It's all gone. Of course, it also, if it's valid, it'll have a class of valid. So we'll put the background color to this crazy color, 348934. And if it's invalid, background color, and that's this nuts one. Save it. There's our valid back. Perfect. And I think that's at least for the moment, except we need to update this a little bit. So we're come back here and we're in the controls template component. So this is a basic example component.pug file. And what I want to do is I have the form group contained within there, and I'm going to put a div.controls. All the controls will be wrapped in that. There's actually going to be a lot more contained within that, but just to keep with apparently where I left off the note, I don't think I've done any. Oh no, I went ahead and did inside here. So we have the form data, which is the left hand side, and the right hand side we'll do controls. We need the grid area. I called that controls, and we gave that a padding, and that padding was gutter. All right, so now it's formatted a little bit better. We need to work on the inside and such like that next time. But at least to check, now we can visibly see that things are working correctly. So hopefully when I type into the input text box, we'll see it appear over here in the data. And of course we do. I don't think that I overflowed it. I did not. I guess we'll still have some edit or CSS to do. I'm not sure why I didn't do it in... Oh, I did do it in this one. I just skipped it. So that was supposed to be the ending thing, seeing everything is working. So we did the form data heading part. Let's come out of the form data heading, and we're right here. So let's do form output heading. So those are the H3s, margin 0, and font size 1.15 EM. Save that. Perfect. We're getting there. So now we'll do form data output. Right, to put a background color on this. I'm sure there's a method to my madness for that, but it's the background color for form data. And we'll say border none. Box shadow, none. Who knows why? Overflow, auto. White space, pre. I don't want the browser to format it. And we'll do margin bottom and 0.25 EM. Save that. All right. Now just forget that I already typed in the input. Just imagine I'm typing in for the first time. So we have the input, or saving, and if it gets too big, I want my size to be the same. I still want to have access to it though, so overflow is helping us out there. Delete it, back to none. So everything is working correctly. I said, of course, we'll continue from here. We need to format the right-hand side a little, more, so we have the 3 columns on the inside. I also have this additional information at the bottom, which shows an overall view of how to create this form group and any configuration that needs to happen within the component that contains the form group. But we'll all see that in the next video or two. Thank you for taking the time to watch our video. I know that your time is valuable. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and click the thumbs up button, as well as share the video with your friends. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. And once again, thank you, and I will talk to you in the next video.